Hello and welcome to a new podcast from the Belt and Road Institute in Sweden. My name is Hussein Askary. Today is Tuesday, July the 8th, 2025. We had just saw the conclusion of the BRICS Summit or the BRICS Plus Summit. And this is the group of nations with Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. But now they are called BRICS Plus because they have grown to 10 nations. As you can see in this image, it's more than 10 here. The interesting thing is that President Donald Trump, President of the United States, 2 days ago threatened that all nations who deal with BRICS and the BRICS new mechanisms for trade in local currencies and dodging the US dollar will be punished by tariffs, but this did not thwart nations from joining. It's like the Belt and Road Initiative. The more the United States and the West threaten nations not to join, the more nations join it because it's beneficial, it is good. And therefore, you see here is that besides the 10 members, I will come to that, we have also partner nations and also friends of the BRICS. So this is a growing. We have the original members were Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. And then they were joined by Egypt, Ethiopia, Iran, United Arab Emirates in 2024. And then we had this year Indonesia joining. The basic principle for these nations is that these were the fastest growing economies after the global financial crisis in 2008. And one important thing to remember is that the BRICS is not an anti-Western organization. It's an intergovernmental. It's not anti-Western. As the leaders of this organization have said, we are non-Western, but not anti-Western. And because it cares about establishing a mechanism for trade, economic cooperation, investment, financial transactions, which is not controlled by Western powers, and it caters to the interests of the nations themselves who are members, but also what is called the Global South. The Global South has been left out since the Bandung Conference in 1955, which it did not really manage to get the Global South nations to be independent and strong economic power and political power in the world. So this is now a rebirth of the Bandung spirit. But the nations of the Global South, they say, we want to have a system where we are equally represented, that our interests are respected, and the mechanisms for the how the international economic, financial, and geopolitical system have been run are not really equitable, and they are dominated by Western interests, catering to Western interests. So now the world has changed. Originally, the 5 nations of the BRICS, the original members, their economies grew from 1999 to 2020 by almost 350%. They were the fastest growing, while the Western or the G7 countries' economy or their share of the global economy has been declining. The share of the BRICS nations has been rising. So already by, this is a chart which shows the GDP of these nations. While GDP, the gross domestic product is not very accurate measurement, but it's roughly used to, to get a sense of the size of the economies. But it does not really represent the activities within each economy. But anyway, it's a general reference point where we can see that the G7 nations were declining. This is the nominal, in nominal terms. This is the share of the different nations. The G7, 43%, the BRICS, 28%, and the rest of the world, 27% of the global GDP. But other economists, they measure the GDP in terms of purchasing power parity, which means that that $1 does not have the same purchasing power in the West and G7 as in the BRICS countries, because with $1 in the BRICS countries, you have much higher purchasing power of a basket of goods than what you can buy with $1 in the G7 countries. And already, actually, the BRICS nations, the original five, have surpassed the GDP of the G7 group already, actually, in 2017, 2018. But what is interesting is not where things are today. As Prime Minister Modi actually said several years ago, is that what is special about the BRICS nations is not what they have of existing resources, but what is interesting is their potential. And this is very interesting because the BRICS nations are like just started growing. As we see in the case of China, China's growth has been exponential, and China's future and potential is much greater than it was before. And in the future, it will just grow and surpass everyone, including the United States, very soon. So they are just starting the development process. And as we know, with more technological, scientific progress, the growth and the development accelerates in a nonlinear way. It's not like adding 1 to 2 and 3 and 4. It starts growing exponentially, like 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. This is what's going to happen with these economies, while we see the West is stagnating. Now, the BRICS nations, they represent half of the world population, 40% of the land mass. Also, as we discussed, the great portion of the global GDP, but also the growth, but also the industrial capacity of the nations of the BRICS has increased enormously, especially China. China is the leading economy in these countries, and China today is the world manufacturing power, surpassed everyone else. But Brazil, India, even Russia are already there. So these are very important things. Now, adding Egypt, United Arab Emirates, Ethiopia, and now Indonesia, Saudi Arabia was invited in most, in news, Saudi Arabia is mentioned. Saudi Arabia was invited, but it did not join. It's still, thinking about it because of its very strong relationship to the United States. But the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Ethiopia, and now, and Iran, of course, and Indonesia, these countries, although they are not major economic powers, they are potential major powers and have very, very important strategic significance in the global economy and the regional economies in West Asia, so-called Middle East, and in Africa, like Egypt and the Suez Canal. Iran is sitting on the crossroads of the continents. And then we have, of course, the United Arab Emirates and potentially Saudi Arabia. They are major financial powers who can contribute greatly. And now Indonesia is one of the most populous nations in Asia and in the world, and also a rising economic power also as part of the ASEAN. So in any case, we have many questions, and one of the biggest questions which was always raised is the question of de-dollarization, that the BRICS countries will move away from the dollar. They will establish their own financial and banking and transaction systems. And so this is what scares Donald Trump, because the dominance of the dollar is challenged. But there are many other important things here which should be taken into consideration. And therefore, today, I'm very happy to be joined by Professor Italo Poty from Brazil, but right now in China. So we have the best of two worlds to discuss this question with you. Thank you for joining us again.
Thank you, Hussein. Thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here.
Thank you. The last interview we done last month was got very good reactions. We talked about the CELAC, the Caribbean and Latin American nations, and China cooperation, and the Belt and Road Initiative, and many people liked it very much. So it was very good, in terms of information, in terms of knowledge that we could share with our viewers, and I'm happy that you are with us today. Dr. Italo Poty is a professor at the Institute of Strategic Studies at Fluminense University in Brazil, but currently is a researcher at the Guangdong Institute for International Strategies in China. I don't know what you think about my introduction. We both looked at the primary reports about the final declaration of the BRICS Plus nations. But what are your first impressions about that?
I think your initial presentation was very accurate. BRICS now has a political importance that is a reflex from its economic growth in the world in the recent decades. So if we take a look at the global economy from the 90s, from the globalization process until today, if you take the G7 countries, their aggregate GDP growth, and compare with only BRICS countries in the same period, we notice a trend that the BRICS countries are growing economically much more than the G7 countries. Of course, China has an important position, important weight on that economic growth, but also the other countries play a significant role, and that there's a reason for that, because since the globalization and the Chinese economic rise, we can observe in the global economy a change in the economic relations, which usually were more in the direction from north to south countries, reflecting old colonial relations, to south-south economic cooperation. And China has been playing a crucial role on that. And projects such as the Belt and Road Initiative, and I believe the BRICS cooperation now contributes to that, resulted in this new context for the world.
Yeah, you recently wrote an article together with your colleagues from the Guangdong Institute for International Strategies, where you argue basically that the BRICS countries will leverage their economic power to reflect political power. And we saw that actually the final declaration had very, very strong language on respecting international law, the United Nations Charter, completely against imposition of the unilateral sanctions, tariffs, and all these that the United States basically and its allies have been practicing. But there are very strong condemnations of the attack on one of the members of BRICS, which is Iran, and also the denunciation of the genocide in Gaza by the Palestinians, although the declaration did not call it genocide, but President Lula da Silva of Brazil, the day before, he called it genocide. And therefore, the nations of the BRICS seems that they are leveraging their growing economic power to assert their presence in the global political arena too. I think that was the essence of your article, if you can elaborate a bit more.
Yes, there is a very interesting and kind of ironic situation in the world today, which is the country that led the creation of this system and of these international institutions, which is the United States, is now confronting them and going against them, going against the rules and norms that they pushed the creation, the elaboration of those norms. So we can take trade, the WTO norms and rules. Now the US disregards completely the rules of the WTO by imposing unilateral tariffs on every single country in the world, practically. And if we take, I believe, a more serious and I'm sure that the more urgent subject of international relations today, which is the genocide in Gaza and the attacks on Iran, also there are norms and rules for conflicts and war that the US are completely disrespecting now, and by the way, together with Israel. So BRICS countries, we can talk about Brazil, China. Usually, since the 90s, they are countries that advocate for respect multilateral rules and norms, and in trade, in finance, and in conflict subjects. So now what we see is a weakening of multilateral institutions, and BRICS emerges now as a possibility of keep global cooperation. BRICS, international relations scholars call it informal multilateral group. But they have today, because of their economic growth and the political importance that they achieved now, they can try to reshape the multilateral governance. It is a classical, a traditional flag, a demand from BRICS to fairness and inclusiveness, representativeness within the international institutions, reflecting the weight of global South countries. So I believe that, yes, BRICS is converting now its economic strength into political activism in international relations. And me, together with my colleagues here in the GIIS, in the article you mentioned, we observed two opposite trends regarding BRICS. One of them is that BRICS, on the one hand, tries to strengthen international cooperation within the traditional international institutions. So BRICS tries to, one of the goals of BRICS is to strengthen these institutions. For instance, one of the demands of BRICS is to revive the Doha round of the WTO and try to renegotiate the Doha round. So it's an attempt to strengthen a traditional multilateral institution. But on the other hand, BRICS now also emerges as an alternative multilateral mechanism. So there are two opposite trends. And when we observe Donald Trump, the president of the US, threatening not only BRICS countries, but every country who deals with BRICS, and by imposing tariffs, I believe the second trend is being pushed by the US and Western institutions or Western countries. So there's these two opposite trends. On the one hand, BRICS wishes to promote cooperation with Western countries and strengthen their traditional institutions, which BRICS countries are also part of them. But on the other hand, BRICS emerges as an alternative multilateral group, kind of being in opposition to Western-led traditional institutions.
Right. Yeah. So the BRICS countries are telling the West, look, if you respect us, if you respect international law and the rules and so on, we can work together. But if you don't, we cannot force you, but we will have to build our own mechanisms, our own structures, so we can protect ourselves both against your economic, financial, and military, coercive policies. And this is very sad for the world, but it's necessary for those nations now. And the fact that they have garnered enough economic, technological, scientific, and financial power, they can actually manage on their own. And these are actually come very, very transparently in the declaration of the leaders of the BRICS. I mean, it's a very long document. It's like 31 pages. There are like over 40 different points, but they're very important. But we can summarize them in four major aspects. First is, of course, the political part, which you just discussed, that the importance to respect international law and UN Charter, But then the other part, which everybody is speculating about, is the financial cooperation among those nations. Will there be a BRICS currency replacing the dollar? Will there be a new systems replacing the SWIFT for cross-border financial transactions? There is also one important thing is on the technology transfer and the building of infrastructure, which is integrated also in this idea of the Belt and Road Initiative. And then very important point taken up this time is the food security for the BRICS countries and their allies and other nations in the global south, which is a very big security issue and geopolitical issue historically. And now they say we have to resolve that one. There are also issues, of course, on health and also on the climate. We don't have time to discuss these, but to start with the financial aspect, it's very clear that there is no intention that the BRICS countries establish a BRICS currency. This is not in the discussion. But what is in discussion is to avoid the coercive measures and the long-arm justice system of the United States using the dollar as a weapon. These nations are establishing bilateral mechanisms using local currencies and pooling these within certain structures. Now, this will go to trade among nations, how banking transactions are done. Two is the investments, and the BRICS New Development Bank is going to have a much bigger role now. There will be new mechanisms of investment in infrastructure and in industry, but also bringing in the private financial sector and power into this. I can just read for you one interesting fact. That within the BRICS 5 original members, there are 4,716 centimillionaires, that millionaires with more than $100 million, 4,700 of them. And there are 549 billionaires in those countries. Now, I'm not a fan of, this is not really reflective of the wealth, but there is enormous financial resources growing in China, in ASEAN countries, and in other parts of the global south, and that these financial resources can be pooled to create financial and credit mechanisms to finance infrastructure, industry, agriculture, and things which were previously totally dependent on the World Bank, the IMF, and support from the United States and the EU. Now, those nations can become independent in terms of creating the financial. By the way, there was a very strong push in this summit to reform the IMF and World Bank. They said was created when we were poor nations. Now things have changed. We have to reform the IMF and the World Bank so we have much bigger representation of the BRICS nations and the global south within them. So this shift is reflected even in, I can just mention there are two ways so far, because Russia is pushing to establish a pan-BRICS cross-border financial transaction system. That's understandable because Russia has been cut off all international financial, their assets have been frozen. So they need ways of dealing with other nations, to making transfers, to making trade. China and Russia, they have their trade has grown by 90 times in the past 20 years. But China and Russia, they have their own cross-border and currency, systems. In China, it's called Cross-Border Interbank Payment System, the CIPS. And this is used as an alternative to the SWIFT system, which is based in Belgium, but it's American-controlled, it's dollar-dominated. So if any two persons in the world or two companies want to send money to each other or pay each other, it has to go through the SWIFT and through American system. And if that means that the United States have total, they can see everything that's taking place, and they also can stop things, they can punish people, and so on. So China has created this system, which is now shared by 3,000 financial institutions in 110 countries. In 110 countries, people can actually trade in the Chinese renminbi. and their own local currency, and avoid totally the using the dollar and the SWIFT system. In Russia, they have created the system for transfer of financial messages, this SPFS, which is used now with other nations like China. I think that most of the trade between China and Russia is going through the SIPS system and also using local currency up to 95% of their trade. Russia is using the same thing with India. Iran and China, Iran and Russia, because Iran is under total sanctions and embargo by financial institutions in the West. So there are these things now developing. And out of these bilateral national systems, I think the BRICS countries want to create a pan-BRICS system. And this is being discussed. It's not, there was no decision to establish it immediately, but to start doing it. You in Brazil, I think we saw the news recently that the Chinese and the Brazilian bank have already established a bilateral interbank transaction system using local currencies. How much is that is becoming a normal thing in Brazil?
I think that it's only in the beginning. It's kind of a big structural shift in the international system. If we recall the international political economy debate on hegemony, if you take the British hegemony, it was linked to their international currency, to the sterling pound as the international currency. And then the American hegemony was built around the dollar hegemony. So one of the key pillars of hegemony is the international currency. So if BRICS now is able to build a system to use local currencies, and the international system begins to, international financial and trade system begins to operate that do not have the need to rely on only one international currency by a hegemon country, it will be really a big change. And all the international relations scholars, experts will need to stop and study to understand it, because since capitalism began to develop, the normal situation that you have, except during the World War I, interwar, and World War II period, when the sterling pound was weak, could not be the international currency, and the dollar did not became the international currency. The 30s was marked by a trade war, and the autarkies, the countries and economic blocs they closed their economies to international trade. It was a time of retraction of international trade. But then when World War II came to an end, the US dollar became the international currency. So now, if BRICS is able to build a system to use local currencies, and I believe we are seeing now the first steps of this, but it's not an easy change to operate. And even more difficult would be to create a collective currency for BRICS. It's not easy. If we take a look at, for instance, I believe the only successful experience, but full of contradictions, which is the Eurozone, it's very hard for countries to abandon some part of their sovereignty and have another center controlling and defining the exchange rate policy, interest rates policy of this new currency. So, but instead of it, by using local currencies, I think it's much more feasible in the short term. And regarding Russia, I believe Russia and the economic sanctions are a good example of how the global economy today is able to avoid this power of the dollar, because the economic sanctions are not working. Russia is being able to rewrote their export, import, and financial transactions. And we can also apply that idea to the trade war with China. How China, the first trade war that Donald Trump launched in 2018, China was able to rewrote their exports to other countries and avoid the tariffs. That's why Trump now tried to make a very broad tariff policy, including almost every country in the world. So I believe it's already a sign of how the financial and the trade global system cannot anymore be centralized around the US and the US dollar. And I believe what BRICS is doing now can be understood as the first steps in the new direction that may be a totally new international system in which we will not be anymore forced into do international transactions using only one currency of a hegemonic power. The more military mighty power in the world, you have to deal with their currency. So you have an asymmetric relation. And for some countries, historically, like Iran and other countries in Latin America, like Cuba, now more recently Venezuela, they have been suffering a lot with this system, even though it was not sufficient to make those countries to kneel down and change their internal policy, converting themselves in what the US or the West want them to be. So I believe BRICS now can be this new mechanism that turns it possible to build a more, ultimately, it will be a more democratic international trade and investment system when several countries can use their own currencies.
Yeah, this is what they say. We want the multilateral system where everybody is equal, and then you will have polycentric, because there are major economic powers like China, Russia, India will emerge, Brazil will become but they will have to respect the interests and rights of other nations. Like the difference between the BRICS and EU, for example, they have different political systems. They are geographically spread all over the planet. They have different culture and so on. And they don't want to change that. And everybody said, fine, we don't want you to change that. We want to find common goals. And this is what is interesting for us. We don't want you to impose your ideas, your culture, your political system, your dress code on us. We want to work together as equals and find out what is equal. Concerning the financial part, which, as you say, there's no intention to create one currency or something, but to create mechanisms where it makes this multilateral system more open. And from the declaration itself, we can read in point 49, it says, we welcome the BRICS interbank cooperation mechanism, focus on facilitating and expanding innovative financial practices and approaches for projects and programs, including finding acceptable mechanisms for financial and local currencies, for financing in local currencies. We welcome a continued dialogue between the ICM and the NDB. So this is a discussion, but that's where the intention is. And then it says at point 50, we task our ministers of finance and central bank governors, as appropriate, to continue the discussion of the BRICS cross-border payments initiative and acknowledge the progress made by the BRICS Payment Task Force in identifying possible pathways to support the continuation of discussion in the potential of greater interoperability of BRICS payment systems. So this is what we discussed. There are already national systems, but they are not generalized to include all the countries, but they can still be used. If you want to deal with Russia, there's this SPCF. If you want to deal with China, they have the SIPs and so on and so forth. But that already there. But if it's necessary, we can create a common interbank system. But these are, as you said about the euro, these are very complicated. It might not be necessary. But the important thing here, and this is our next point, is the question of building infrastructure, industrialization, and transfer of technology, because this is one of the big issues in the declaration and which has been discussed. And it's really, as we have also talked about the Belt and Road Initiative, that this is a major focus of the BRICS countries. Now, Russia proposed a new investment platform for infrastructure in Kazan last year. Brazil is pushing this very much, and they want to create a specific, it's like the new development bank does have mechanisms for financing infrastructure and industrial projects for the member nations and also other countries. And the new development bank is open for other nations to become members in the bank, even though they are not members in the BRICS. So it's like the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank. It can include anybody. And therefore, this is becoming the next very important. As I said, the BRICS power is not what they are today. The power is what they are becoming. And the process of development, and both in terms of infrastructure, technology, science, and so on, is a key component of this. So you had some views on this question of technology transfer and how key that is to the future of the BRICS and the global South.
I think it's a vital question for BRICS. If we compare the system built after World War II, in which the US, through the United Nations and all their mechanisms, promised that they would promote development all over the world. At that time, it was created the Economic Commission for Latin American Caribbean Development and the Economic Commission for Africa, and so on. For instance, I know very well the Latin American one because it generated very important debates on industrialization and modernization in Brazil and in all of Latin America. Those initiatives, at some point, until the early 80s, they were working, but they were abandoned. So I think that for BRICS, it's very important to be able to really build a framework to promote development, and we can connect this with some important problems that a lot of global South countries have, which is poverty, food security, which is one of the points of the final declaration of BRICS, is another problem within several global South countries. So one of the best ways to deal with that ultimately is by promoting economic development. So I think one of the key points which may differ completely from the Western initiatives is technological transfer, because if we take the recent divergences within the WTO between Western countries and China, even some global South countries and China, is regarding intellectual property. And this is the problem of you want to monopolize technology. And what we see now, for instance, is China, which is the most developed country of BRICS and the global South, that they are building some technologies and kind of distributing them. One big example is DeepSeek. It's a very strong AI platform, and it is open source. So anyone can access its code and try to develop something. It's the contrary with OpenAI and other American companies that want to close to keep only for them the technology protected by intellectual property rights. So I believe it's one of the most important challenges for BRICS is and it will be, I think, a landmark for the success in the long term of the group, being able to promote development and improvement of social and economic conditions to its member. Of course, there are the internal issues of each country. it's not, you cannot promote development from outside to inside. You have internal dynamics that are essential to promote development, but the international environment is a key factor to economic development, since we have globalized, a hyper globalized economy in which every country depends on imports, exports, external foreign investments, and so on. So I believe that economic development is a key challenge for BRICS, and one of the issues that BRICS can make different from previous experiences is trying to promote technological transfer and skills. And you mentioned infrastructure. I believe it's, if I may continue this long response.
Yes. No, that's important.
Infrastructure, I believe now we have this initiative, this big project, the Belt and Road Initiative, that are building infrastructure throughout the global south, like in Asia, Africa, and now Latin America. I believe it can promote the enlargement and the expansion of BRICS, because it is promoting much more, not only economic and financial and trade intercourse, but also cultural exchanges and facilitating this kind of more people-to-people exchanges between countries, between global south countries. So I believe that the Belt and Road Initiative, by providing infrastructure, both on financing or by foreign direct investment, it can potentially bring new members to join BRICS, because I believe there is an economic realm in which those countries are being more connected, and BRICS can be this political institution that gives voice to everyone, and try to balance and build a more democratic and inclusive international system.
Yeah. No, this idea of the investment or financing infrastructure has become a very big issue, because the traditional Bretton Woods institutions, they don't care anymore about building infrastructure. They are more interested in policy, steering the policies of nations, especially in the global south. And many of the nations there, especially the poor nations with low income, they are being told, if you can't afford to build railways, you should not build railways. If you can't afford to build hospitals, you should not build hospitals. This is their argument against China. They say China is lending money to those countries, but they cannot afford it. And it's completely immoral to tell people you don't have money, so you can't build roads, water systems, electricity systems, healthcare, and education. Why not? And therefore, this idea of finding new mechanisms for investment in infrastructure, because without infrastructure, these nations will never get out of poverty. We know this from the United States. We know it from Europe. We know it from China. We know it from everywhere. If you don't have strong infrastructure, power, water, transport, education, healthcare, you can never come out of poverty. It's not the other way around. You don't get rich first and then you build infrastructure. And this is the trick that has been used now against China and the Belt and Road. Say that poor nations cannot afford to borrow money to build infrastructure, and China is using that as a leverage. And that's the false argument. And therefore, I think the BRICS nations, the new development bank, Mrs. Delma Rousseff, has a very healthy idea why it is important to borrow for infrastructure. I had the honor of meeting her last year in Beijing on the sidelines of it. I gave her my book as a gift, but I have listened to her speaking about this point. He says there are many projects in Africa, and these are very big projects like the Grand Inga Dam. This will provide electricity for hundreds of millions of people. And everybody say, oh, well, we don't have money to finance them. Why not? They will change life for people. And therefore, this new mechanisms of the BRICS to find ways of financing infrastructure is very important. They want to involve also the private sector in those countries, not private sector from Europe and the United States. But we have a huge private sector growing. We have a huge, as I mentioned, financial resources in those countries. We have the Gulf Cooperation Council countries, the Arab countries. They have enormous financial power. China has enormous, but China alone cannot solve all the problems. So you can leverage the financial resources of every country in the global south to finance infrastructure, industrialization, and so on. And I think the BRICS is taking, I think people should take time to read the declaration. It's very long, but it's very, very good food for thought. Don't rely on the media to explain for you, this is all wrong. I don't do that. I go and read the document itself. I spend time, and then I make my own mind about what is important. What we are doing here is trying to explain why that is significant for you, but you have to go and read the declaration yourself. We will put a link to the text, of course, so you can read it yourself. This is how you learn things. It's not by seeing what the media is saying. But so anyway, this is a very important point, Professor Poty. Then we have the question of the food. I was a bit surprised that this was included in the declaration. And there's a long section because, like lack of money for infrastructure, the global south countries, many of them are victims of the lack of food security. So they use all their resources. They even borrow money to buy food from outside instead of growing food at home. And therefore, they become victims of the global monopolies, the global commodity cartels and exchanges like in London, in Chicago, and in New York. They set the prices for food in the world, and they control a lot of it. And now the BRICS countries say, and Russia led actually, this was already last year, that they have to create a BRICS food grain exchange to secure food for all the member nations, but also the global south at reasonable prices at all time. But also to develop the agriculture in the BRICS countries, but also in the global south. Most of the BRICS countries are the world leaders in grain, like Russia is the world leader in grain production, China, India, Brazil. But other nations like Egypt, South Africa, and most Arab countries, they're completely dependent on import of food. And that makes them vulnerable for political pressure and also financial crisis when the food price goes up. I think you have some experience from Brazil, which is an important source of grain in the world.
Yes, it was a very good surprise that they included it in the final declaration of the BRICS Summit. In Brazil, we had a recent experience that is a very good example to understand why it is important. Brazil, as everybody knows, is a great food and producer and exporter. And Brazil, since a considerable time ago, had a policy of keeping reserves of essential grains to keep the prices stable. And the main goal of it is because Brazil has its economic and social problems and poverty, to keep food, the basic food, affordable to people. So the Brazilian government usually bought some part of the production to keep some reserves, and when the markets were in trouble and prices were soaring, the Brazilian government intervened, putting their grains in the market to keep the prices low and keep the food affordable. So I believe it's an essential policy to any country. And what happened in 2016 or 17, after President Dilma was overthrown from power? By the way, she was trying to run a developmentalist strategy in Brazil to control the financial sector and push an agenda of industrialization. and a lot of internal forces combined with external forces, mainly from the US, operated her impeachment, and without any evidence of fraud or crime, she was overthrown from power. But so the next government, they stopped this policy of grain reserve in Brazil. And what happened is when Brazil entered the economic crisis, we have now food inflation. But now the new Lula government, he came back with this policy, but it was abandoned for almost from 2016 or 17 to 2022-23. So it was a period of time in which Brazil faced inflation of basic food because we hadn't had this protection. So I think that BRICS, by establishing such a mechanism for the group, and even considering now that we have new members from West Asia that are dependent on import of foods, it's a very strategic move beyond the humanitarian importance of this policy. Is a strategic move to protect those new members so they can feel included in the group, their demands included, and they are very important strategic members, as you mentioned before, because of their geopolitical position in the world, because they have some of them have a lot of oil, and also they can provide significant reserves, financial reserves to strengthen the new development bank. So I believe this policy, thinking about food security, is very important. And for BRICS Plus, thinking about in more rounds of expansion to include more countries in Africa and so on, this kind of policy is essential.
Yeah, no, I think it's genius to think about the food aspect in this whole discussion, because like you have the new members, Iran, the United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, and Ethiopia. Ethiopia is a different case. I can mention that soon. But Iran, United Arab Emirates, and Egypt, they're totally dependent on import of grains, for the basic food. Because of the drought, these are dry regions. It's very difficult to grow food. There's a lot of oil, but there isn't enough water. And therefore, they can, if they are secure, they will not be blackmailed by the international market. What you mentioned about Brazil is like the previous government, the right-wing government, they say the market will solve the problem. But the market is not free. It's controlled by cartels. They decide the price. They are the boss. There is no free market. This is a myth. And therefore, the food, it should not become a tool for either profit-making or political pressure. And therefore, now Ethiopia actually, thanks to very good reform policies and development, pushed also by support from China, they are solving their food security problem. Egypt now is trying to grow grains in the desert using part of the Nile River water. So there will be gradually, these nations will also become capable. So it's not only sharing the food, but making those nations capable of growing their own food, because food is not such, it's a strategic commodity, but it should not become a weapon. Everybody should be able. My philosophy is that there are three things make you a sovereign nation. If you can provide your own water, if you can provide your own electricity, and if you can provide your own food, you are an independent sovereign nation. If any of them is missing, you are not fully sovereign, because someone else is controlling your livelihood. These three things are very essential. And these should not become weapons. These should not become a purpose, making profit. It should be shared by everyone: water, electricity, and food. And then technology is a different thing. If you are clever in certain technologies, you want to be number one in the world, that's fine, no problem. But it's not using these three things. So this is a very good surprise, actually, to see it in this document. I think there's very much to discuss about this, but as I said, people should read the document itself And we can, of course, explain certain things, but this is a very, very fascinating and big development. If you have any further points you want to discuss or mention or conclude with, it's appreciated.
I'd like only to add, but not to be pessimistic, but to talk about a little bit of the challenges of BRICS, because we are talking about the potential, and I believe there is a lot of potential. As you said, it's a very good quote regarding the potential of what can BRICS be in the future, because we are talking about structural change in the international system. It's not an easy move to make. It's kind of thinking about a huge transatlantic ship that move very slowly. So it's very hard to make an abrupt move, changing everything. So I believe BRICS is navigating, to use this metaphor, in this way, being more patient, because there this discussion is if BRICS would remain being a tea party club, the only to gather every year and talk, the heads of state talking, and nothing happens. But I believe kind of strong framework is being built for the future. Of course, we have always to think about the challenges, which the main one is it's a heterogeneous group. Everybody talks about this, but at the same time, I think that BRICS has a principle of respecting the internal affairs of each country. So the heterogeneity of the group can be its strength to think about a more diverse world and not this homogeneous, universalistic project of the West, trying to make all countries in the world as their reflect, as their mirror. So I think that the challenge is to find common ground in international issues and to begin to make some steps further on some initiatives. We are witnessing some of them regarding the de-dollarization. I believe another initiative that President Lula from Brazil mentioned is to build a new infrastructure of submarine cables of internet. I believe it's strategic. It's also a sovereignty move for BRICS countries, thinking about the unpredictability of the US and their partners. It's incredible to see, for instance, how, for instance, Germany is positioning themselves regarding Israel and Gaza, and Iran now siding automatically with the US. So it's very dangerous for the global South, this union of US and Europe with those very strange objectives and very prejudicial policies regarding war and economy to the world. So I think to build a new infrastructure of submarine cables, of internet, is another thing that BRICS countries should move forward and try to make it happen.
Right.
But anyway, I believe I totally agree with you. There's a lot of potential, and it's not only utopic initiative. It reflects real change in the world, economic changes, political changes, and I believe BRICS is much more a result of those changes than a new actor out of the blue trying to change an international system that was perfectly functioning. No, the world order today is dysfunctional. There are structural changes going on, and I believe BRICS is reflecting those changes and has a lot of potential to solve historical problems of the global south, like poverty, the economic development, and so forth and so on.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you took up this question of challenge. Balancing the potential with the existing challenges is very, very important to have a realistic view. And this, as you said, the BRICS emergence is not, and this whole discussion is not coming out of a blue or as a utopian project, but it's a reaction to challenge, real challenges. And as we said earlier, if the United States and Europe do not change their way, they have no other choice than going their own way. But this is not good for the world, to divide the world once again into two different blocks. So we hope that people will come to reason, to their senses and change this policy. As you said, this idea of information security and building an independent internet, either on cables or maybe it could be space based. There are new technologies for internet through space where nations of the BRICS and their friends can exchange communication without being spied on by the United States and the British and others. So, no, thank you very much, Professor Italo Poty, for enriching our discussion with your insights and knowledge. So I'm happy that you could take the time with us again.
Thank you very much, Hussein. It was my pleasure.
Thank you. Thank you very much.